Hey guys, Loman02, getting ready to do a quick series of videos involving playing the control 100 card singleton. And this first match is actually against the aggro. So I think that was a pretty easy mulligan right there. We need to have our lands. We're pretty sure at the beginning, at the offset, just knowing what Bandit Kieth has played historically, that he's on aggro, and keeping a one-lander does not seem like the way to win. We have to get to our powerful stuff and hope to stave off the early beats. In the case of our 6-card hand, drawing an exclude, we do have Batter Skull, so if we can manage to stay alive long enough to get a Batter Skull down and get a swing in with it, we'll likely turn the tide of the game. We'll lead off with Port Town, untapped, and play our Ponder out at this point. What we end up seeing is 2 lands and a dissolve. I believe we put land in hand, even though he does not have a way to look inside our hand or affect our hand. Outside of like a card, not dissolve, absorb, which is another card that I think is going to help keep us alive. He's had a relatively slow start for an aggro deck, leading off with 2 mountains and no other play, which makes me think he either has a lot of instant speed burn in hand, and possibly like a 3-drop critter, or maybe a 4-drop critter, or planeswalker. Could be like Koth the Hammer. We see him finally play out his first critter, which is a full shock sorcerer, which actually does not have me that worried. That card I think is more of a sideboard card, and I'd recommend if you're playing the aggro and you need that, you probably put it in your board. It is a card advantage engine against certain matchups. And here it's not horrendous, but for 3 mana, I think you can do better. Here I believe we go ahead and exclude this Mogflunkies. Not that it's an extremely large threat, but I want to get deeper into my deck, and I find a Detention Spear, get Reckless Charge, which is fairly rough. We'll leave up the Absorb at this point in time, do not take damage off of our land, and for the Reckless Charge this time, we go ahead and cast our Absorb, so we don't get hit for 5 damage here. Right. We go ahead and draw a Supreme Verdict there. We opt to cast the Batter Skull out, basically forcing him to interact with it. So Red Deck Wins has a couple good ways of getting rid of artifacts. The best one is probably Fiery Confluence, even though there are many ways to deal with them, but not all of them are synergistic with the core plan of the deck, which is to kill you as fast as I can. I think as far as 4-drops go, Fiery Confluence is one of those cards that you definitely want to have in your Red Deck Wins. One, it can just do 6 damage to the face. It can help you get ahead from behind on the board if you're on an open board, which is generally not the best use of it. But it also can take care of an artifact plus dome someone for 4, which, if he had a card like that and he cast it now, I'd be in trouble again. Now, given I do have a Supreme Verdict that would allow me to kind of get back in the game, but he would do 4 to me, plus 2, so 6 damage, plus destroy my only threat. We get dome for 1. And he ends up using his Full Shock Sorcerer plus a card to kill the Batter Skull. So Batter Skull enables us to getting up 1 card. We go ahead and Supreme Verdict here, and actually we kill the card we thought we were going to see, which is Blistering Firecat. We see a 5-drop come out. This is a strong card, but I don't think it's where red wants to be. It's more of a big red card. We go ahead and Detention Spirit and leave up Mana Leak and Impulse. We see a Killing Fiend. We allow that to happen because we know he has to use Burn on his turn, which actually I like. I'd rather him have to use Burn on his turn. We go ahead and pass it back with the intent to use our Anticipate, but also with Cryptic Command plus Path to Exile up. I'm not going to kill this with Path to Exile because I don't see a need to 2-for-1 myself at this point. I go ahead and get the Counterspell, putting the 2 Wrath effects, the Engineered Explosives plus the Wrath I've got on the bottom. Cast out the Batter Skull again after returning it with my extra mana, and he goes ahead and concedes it there, because knowing the 2 cards that he has remaining in his hand, plus the Killing Fiend. And here, if he has Burn, he has to aim it at my Germ, which 2 cards for Burn. I mean, he could have, I'm trying to think if there's a way he can kill me this turn. Not really. He could either kill my Skull and get through, 7 to 8 damage with, 7 damage with the Killing Fiend, unless he happens to have let's say Fire Blast and Exquisite Firecraft. He uses Exquisite Firecraft to kill the Germ, sacrifices the 2 mountains, and then he does 4 plus 7. That's still not enough, and all he's done is killed the Germ, and he's out of cards at that point, which allows me to take my next turn to use Path to Exile, leaving up the Cryptic Command to counter his next threat, and if he doesn't have a next threat, then I can return the Skull and leave up the counter spell, not having used the Path. So I think that was probably the tightest line of play. As we go on, what you'll see is this next match we get quite handily overrun, so our opponent is on the play. And what happens here is we really kind of fail to draw a Wrath. So he has a Goblin Cohort turn 1, we go ahead and preordain, keep both those cards, because and that's kind of a questionable decision. I think that Gideon is something we want to keep, but the Factor Fiction is a longer-term game plan. Although, my thinking is this. I have a 2-drop, I have a 3-drop, I have 2 4-drops available to me. Although, more than likely, I'm going to try to put my Planeswalkers on the board to soak up damage and also just to delay him so I can get to a Wrath of God, because I think he's more of a creature-based red deck at this point. So my plan is going into turn 2 that I know for sure I'm going to cast Impulse on his turn, looking for a Wrath effect. We go ahead and cast the Impulse here. Take the Hydroblast, put the rest on the bottom, no Wrath effect, some counter magic, but I know that I'm going to kind of have to go tap out against him to make this work. So I go ahead and put down the Gideon, make the Cohort unable to damage me. He plays out a Goblin Fodder, making his Mogg Raider pretty tough to deal with. Now, interestingly, he attacks just us. I think he understands that's kind of our game plan. We put a White Soldier token into play and say, alright, well, deal with this. He goes ahead and Searing Blazes us for no value off the Searing Blaze, so we only take 1 damage. At this point, he goes ahead and knocks our Elspeth out, which is good for us because we want to soak up this damage while we hunt for cards, the right cards. We do find an Absorb and a Miscalc, but we are tapped out at this point. We have to get back ahead. And he's actually on 5 cards. He's on card parity with us, really because he has not been hitting lands. But assuming that he has card parity is kind of a bad assumption, I think, because well, he does have cards in hand. They're probably not as strong as ours, and his mana base is not developed to cast his spells. We go ahead and Hydroblast this card. We did make the Mogg Raiders. So it could not do more damage to us that turn. Find a Flash Flood, put the other 2 back on top. See this card come out, and what we're seeing in this card is a mana sink, and I kind of like that because it means that I can utilize spells and effects to hopefully get him to sink his mana into it and then just kind of blow him out. I'm really hoping for a Wrath effect here. I do not find it, so I end up taking the Snapcaster because I have to stay alive, and right now I'm not in a great spot as far as doing that. So he gets rid of my Jace, which is still not horrendous. We knew we were drawing the Exclude. At this point, we do have the Snapcaster, plus what we're thinking we have to do is Flash Flood or Hydroblast. Now, I do make a misplay here. I should have used the Flash Flood as opposed to the Hydroblast, but the more interesting line was the use of Factor Fiction to dig deeper. Although, I think at this point, with 4 cards in hand, that's too much damage taken to really enable us to win, be out of risk. We get shocked to the face here, and turn comes back to us. We've kind of missed pretty poorly here. We end up killing his Grim Lavamancer because it's 2 free damage I don't want him to have. I'm hoping to use my Absorb this turn, and I get the opportunity here to gain some life and get out of range of burn. Hit another land. We're expecting to use the Dissolve or the Complicate next turn. We see a Pyrite Spellbomb, so we go ahead and dissolve this, leaving up the Complicate in hopes that he'll have a bigger card. We see kind of the Kiss of Death, which is Enlightened Tutor, which we put to the bottom. If we'd had it 2 turns ago, we could have gotten our Batterskull online, or our Warmth, which we boarded into at this point. We go ahead and counter the Browbeat. I can't obviously take 5 damage here. Go ahead and cycle our Complicate, find additional land, although slight misplay on our part, we probably should have sacked the Misty Rainforest. Although that's not definitive because we did put a card we definitely did not want on the bottom at the beginning of that last turn. So, not definitive, but I think, it's 6 of one, half dozen the other. I mean, we really needed to find there was a threat, which is going to be difficult to find just off cycle. So we end up losing this one quite handily. Go ahead and concede it and go to Game 3. Game 3, if I'm not mistaken, our opponent fails to find enough land to have effect. We keep this one because of the fast interaction it can have, but we know the risk of it is that we may just miss on lands. We do have the Wrath effect this time. I don't want to have to use the Path to Exile willy-nilly, so I'm not going to end up killing these cards. I do end up going ahead and memory lapsing this, or counter squalling it, because that's going to add up over time. It is, essentially a lightning bolt every turn at this point. He goes ahead and does that, and I want to see if he'll pump it, and he does oblige us here, and this allows us to use our Blue Elemental Blast to get rid of this threat, in tying up his mana. We hit our land finally, which is nice. Play on our Gideon of Trials, just select something randomly to pump it up so it can't die to a Lightning Bolt. See a Mogg War Marshal, which is mildly annoying. This is extremely annoying, obviously. So he hits his 4th land and has pretty much the perfect answer to kill our Gideon. However, he hasn't been able to actually threaten our life total. He goes ahead and attacks. He does pay for the Mogg War Marshal intelligently, but that lets me know his hand's probably not as good, or he doesn't have something else he wants to cast, which plays around a Wrath of God. So here we're intending on using our Cryptic Command. We go ahead and use it to tap his team and draw a card. He Lightning Blasts us for 4. Interesting. We go ahead and cast out the Wrath, reducing him to 1 creature threat, and we leave the Path to Exile up. So we see a Flunkies. Cool. You'll see Flunkies kind of punish our opponent here. Now, when he does this, I decide to go for the path because he's already spent a card on it. And I figure, hey, why not? We get hit with Lava Dart, a card I don't think is that great. I don't have a ton of respect for. I go ahead and cast out my Jace, Vryn's Prodigy. I figure it's a Lightning Rod, and it'll soak up some removal. He goes ahead and casts out a Kumano again. So we memory lapse it, and we essentially have multiple turns where we can put that card back on top when he only has 5 mana available. Make his Flunkies a 1/3. Knowing that he's drawing a 5-drop, we just go ahead and let him draw it. I kind of want him to draw a 5-drop every turn if that's what he's going to cast. So he casts it out. I go ahead and unexpectedly absent it back to the top of his deck. Correction, I do not do it there. We go ahead and Hydroblast it. Although, actually, in retrospect, I think a better line would have been to attack. And then, yeah, I think a better line would have been to attack and then unexpectedly absent it. As you can see, it ends up working out regardless. He plays a much more efficient threat, and he spears our Jace, which is, meh, it's fine. We go ahead and unexpectedly absent his Slith Firewalker to the top, knowing that we have dismissed the following turn. Go ahead and hang the Ancestral Visions, and knowing that he's drawing this 2-drop, he actually plays around the counter magic, which I guess that, or he plays around Celestial Colonnade, which does kill either of his threats. Play out the Elspeth and start putting 1/1s on the board, which seems pretty good to me. He can use his Lava Dart to get it, but he uses Searing Blaze instead. I think it was probably better to wait until his turn to see if he would draw a land. We have one more turn on the Ancestral Visions. We draw that, which is nice because it puts a card back in his hand. We start going on the Warpath here with our Celestial Colonnade, knowing that it's a 2-turn clock at this point, and that he has one draw step that I don't know about yet, and I have 2 counter effects. I take that. That's fine. It's 1 damage. I actually let him cast that to attack me because I know I'm only going to go to 1. And I know any card he has in hand, I can either remand or dismiss. And I know I have Ancestral Visions coming off the top of my deck the turn after this turn that I expect to win. So I still have available to me 1 counter spell without having to tap my Celestial Colonnade, which gives me the win. So interesting match, and I think an example of how Control can beat the aggro. Although I will say that I don't think his specific aggro deck is built as efficiently as it could be, which is really where it beats decks like the one I'm playing right now. And actually, you know, we had two draws post-boarded games where really we didn't see any of our hate. Well, we didn't see a ton of our hate. We saw like 2 hate cards that we managed to recycle a bunch of times to some effect. But in the second game, as you could tell, it wasn't really enough. So the last game I'll show is a game between myself and player Sung, who is on, I would call, a mid-range deck. More on the controlling side of mid-range, though. She's on Sultai, and I am on this deck again. We see a Hymn to Turek, which is a strong start for her, because that's a card that, you know, makes me wish I had Spell Snare up on turn 1. I did not, so I end up getting a Scavenging Ooze instead, which keeps a relevant threat off the board, and I think is a relatively powerful card against my deck and its strategy. We allowed the Snapcaster to resolve because my expectation is if I can hit land drops, I can eventually find a Wrath. I'd rather not have, you know, my card countered there. I'd rather her not play a relevant threat. I'd rather her tie up her mana, is kind of the thinking. You know, if she does that and then ends up playing, like, I don't know, you know, this thing or a Grim Flayer or something like that, it just gives her more time. I expect at this point that she does have counter spells in her deck, so I have to play intelligently here, and I don't go for the Sphinx's Revelation. I just take the turn back from her. I go ahead and cast a Brainstorm, find a Humility, which is one that I really want to resolve, but I don't want to do it this turn because I'd like to protect it with Negate. So my thinking is, you know, I'm going to put it back on top to avoid discard and use the Negate on the following turn to back it up. So I cast the Brainstorm out, still put both of my good cards on top to avoid any discard effect. Negate this to get her to tap out. I was hoping she would not have like a 1 mana answer to it. I was hoping for a 2 mana answer, but at this point I am kind of boxed into just going for it. So I go for it here, and I cast out my Humility, which I know is going to make her want to activate her Creeping Tar Pit, and I intend on using my Path to Exile to stay at card parity with her. She goes in for the attack, which would be close to lethal, but 1 short, and she gets her Forest out. We take 2 down to 4, and we find our Elspeth, and on 1 mana, which, you know, this was a nice rip, and I knew it was coming based on the Brainstorm, I'm able to set up a turn where I get Elspeth down, and she only has 1 mana, and Spell Pierce is not applicable to stopping my Elspeth from that position. She gets a Liliana, but it's not a card at this point in time. I fear I go ahead and attack in. If she wants to trade her 5 mana worth of cards for my 0 mana worth of cards, then I'm fine with that. she casts out another creature threat that does nothing. Thrun. Humility kind of beats Thrun. Although, interestingly enough, if you're not familiar, you can still not counter Thrun on the stack because it's only once he's ETB'd. We go ahead and cast this out. I want to play around Miscalc, so I only do it for a few cards. Plus, I already feel like I'm in a dominant position with the cycling land, so I'm going to see a lot of new cards here. Play out the Gideon of Trials and just start pumping him and pumping the Elspeth. I think very shortly after this, she concedes the game. We get her Elspeth here. And after not drawing like a Maelstrom Pulse or something like that, I mean, she needed like a Maelstrom Pulse to get rid of the Humility or the Elspeth or something. But even then, depending on what control suite she has in hand, I have the Mystic Confluence available to me. So game 2 is a lot longer and a little bit more interactive. We had a fairly fortunate draw. Elspeth is one of the best threats in that deck. I think it's one of the best control threats out there, actually. I mean, yeah, it does die to O-Ring, but it doesn't die to a lot of things that non-control decks are not playing. So she gets a T-Goif down. We don't want to kill that yet. I don't really want a 2-for-1 myself with the Path to Exile when she has a Creeping Tar Pit online. I figure eventually I can get her with the Path to Exile on the Tar Pit. I also have Moat, so I kind of want to save my counter magic for actual like Planeswalker threats. Now, I do go for it here, because what I'm hoping is that she'll counter me back, and I can resolve a Moat unmolested. She does not go for it, though. And realistically, like, I probably should have seen through that, in hopes, because, I mean, she's hoping that, that I'll counter it so she can make the Goif bigger. She goes for him to Turek here. I oblige and use the negate, because I don't want to lose, my cards. I only want to lose one card. Just 1-for-1 it. We do have an interesting, secondary interesting answer in Pie the Needle to the land as well, but I kind of want to save that for Planeswalker threats. And here I end up going for the Sphinx's Rev because I figured 2 cards is enough, and if she wants to counter it on her turn, that puts her down to 1 card, which reduces the chances that she has the ability to counter my Moat. I go for the Jace here, bouncing the T-Goif. I figured this will force her to activate her Creeping Tar Pit while replaying the Goif, which reduces her mana count. It allows me to safely resolve the Moat, which has kind of been my long-term game plan, is to stop her, other than with flying creatures, from attacking me. She does activate. I wait for her to tap it in the attack, and then I go ahead and Path to Exile this. She can get her Forest or Swamp. She does so, and we go ahead and draw some more cards. End up, I believe, hanging back the Pithing Needle, and then just using the Swords to Plowshares to get rid of it. I want her to play out more threats here. I kind of want her to waste her mana. This has to happen. I could try to counter that with 2 spells, but I don't want to do it at that point. And at this point, I feel like we're in a pretty dominant board position. We get the Moat out with a Miscalc backup. And, unless she can play like a Planeswalker this turn, which even if she can, I know that she has, I know I have a Pie the Needle, rather, on top of my deck. She does play on a Primeval Titan, which allows her to get a Volrath Stronghold, which is a card that kind of scares me. It actually scares me enough that I do at some point intend on using the Pithing Needle once she starts tying up her mana to get creatures back. We go ahead and recast our Sphinx's Rev for another 2, just to clear the top of our deck. I think it's interesting that she took Gideon, because Gideon really can't win on his own with a Moat in play. I think the Pithing Needle was actually right here. She does that just in case I name Wasteland, but really the strongest card she has in play is Volrath Stronghold. She hasn't put a creature that's really worth getting back other than Snapcaster in her graveyard. But eventually I'll have to counter one, and when I do, in the long game, then I'll have to start countering all of the good creatures. And you'll actually see this comes into play later on in the game, and I think it was extremely relevant that I named Volrath Stronghold here. Outside of the fact that I believe we do get Abrupt Decay at some point in time on Pithing Needle. And wait up for MTGO. Evidently it took me a while to type it in. We are sort of stuck right now. As you can tell, we have a pretty gas hand. Let's see if we can skip this play. Uh-oh. Well, Moto may have just failed, guys. Oh, goodness. Well, I'm going to go on a quick pause, guys, and we'll be... Alright, guys, we're back, and hopefully this works this time. So we're pretty close to where we were. We're at the point where we Sphinx's Rev a secondary time for 2 cards, leaving a Primeval Titan that cannot attack in her hand, or crush it on her board. We go ahead and at this point cast out our Python Needle to stop the Volrus Stronghold. She wastelands properly before the Python Needle can resolve, so I can't name Wasteland. Although I don't think I'm likely to name Wasteland here. That would take me, it's a 6-turn clock to kill her with just Celestial Colonnade, and it ties up my mana. So hopefully the game will work this time. And I'm going to go on a quick secondary pause now, and once it's resolved, then we'll continue watching. Well, hey guys, I've tried as much as I could to make this replay work. Unfortunately, it will not. But to recount what happens after I cast Pithing Needle, naming Volrus Stronghold, where the video unfortunately irrevocably breaks, or the recording does. There are only a couple relevant spells cast until I win the game. The game does go on for another 7 turns, so we went on our turn 18. The Pithing Needle names Volrus Stronghold to stop recursion. She eventually draws an Abrupt Decay to get rid of my Pithing Needle, which I think the question goes back to the use of Duress against the Gideon, as opposed to the Python Needle, which was also in hand at the time, and I think is a more relevant card than Gideon is from this board position. Gideon's ultimate does really nothing relevant. Once you can attack with stuff, it doesn't really, do all that much, because I don't play a lot of creatures. But what is relevant, you can just kill the Gideon as well. But what happens is she Abrupt Decays the Pithing Needle, and then acquires, by this point though, I believe it's 4 turns later, she acquires a Trinket Mage, and finds, as opposed to like an Engineered Explosives or a Python Needle of her own to stop our draw engine, which is Jace, she ends up finding a Walking Ballista, which is something that is capable of killing us on a lot of mana. We end up going at a loss of card economy to continue topping her with Jace, which we begin topping her as soon as this sequence of plays is over to stop her Volrus Stronghold from recurring threats that I counter. Once she gets that, I'm able to buy essentially 5 turns with the vast amount of permission that I have in my hand to go down on some card advantage due to the fact that she's got the Volrus Stronghold, but she always stays at about 2 cards, which is kind of to show you how long-term planning and playing control is really all about long-term planning and not the immediate consequences unless it kills you, or if you have an answer that you can find in the deck. So I apologize for the video breaking, because I think this was actually a very interactive and long game. I mean, it was a turn 18 or 19 game, where eventually, I believe she conceded, but we would have won with our Jace the Mind Sculptor, minusing for 12, ultimate, to erase her library while she was on 0 cards in hand. So a very interesting game, and it's too bad the recording did not work. And I hope you guys enjoyed this very short video series on playing of the control, and specifically Esper control, in 100-card Singleton. I think it's a very viable deck type. I think some of the matchups it struggles with are really aggressive strategies. When you start looking at like Red Deck Wins, that's a predatory deck for this deck. Some of the board space has been reserved for it. However, due to meta, I think this can generally be a safe call due to the fact that Red Deck Wins is not a popular deck right now, and the field has been largely Death and Taxes. 1, due to its lack of expense, and 2, it's just a better aggro deck in general than Red Deck Wins is, because it can beat green X decks with cards like Parallax Wave, Efficient Removal, and then just a faster clock than them, plus protection, so like swords, etc. Plus you have a lot more guys, so you can go horizontally wider, so it just tends to be a better deck in general. It can beat more in the meta. Whereas like Red Deck Wins is really its best against control, but like it languishes horrendously, I think, against like green X decks. It's generally decks that don't have blue, like Abzan just wrecks red, generally speaking. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video series, and this is 100 Card Singleton. So if it's a format that interests you, please jump on gatherling.com and check out the Chainsaw Massacre. It's an event that's run every Saturday, and there's an MTG Salvation link that gives you the rules of the format as well as the time groups that's available. Okay, I hope you guys have a great evening and hope you enjoyed the video. All right, take care.